22 hours and counting until the man senior Republicans are calling the greatest changemaker in American history becomes president. Amid the countdown to his presidency, Donald Trump arrives in readiness for his swearing-in tomorrow at noon. Good evening from Washington. Donald Trump, for so long wedded to his Trump airliner, has finally been detached and flown into Washington aboard a military plane and ferried then into this city amid high security in his final journey before being sworn in on the Capitol dais behind me. Sources inside the Trump camp tonight are already hinting at dramatically shrinking the state, starting tomorrow, cutting taxes, abandoning all endowments for the arts and the humanities, and privatizing all public broadcasting. Abroad, a warming with Russia, a cooling with China and Iran. And what of NATO and EU? With Trump talking to his supporters here tonight, Kylie Morris will report on the build-up here in Washington. In this moment of change, what of the voter beyond the Beltway? Matt Fry is in West Virginia.
This is the second poorest state in the Union. Classic Trump country, classic coal country, where in one county, 86% of the voters opted for Donald Trump. Not surprisingly, they are giddy with excitement here that their time has come and looking forward to tomorrow's inauguration.
Also on tonight's programme, the other presidential inauguration, with all the controversy but less of the fanfare. Former Argos security guard Adama Barrow won the Gambian elections fair and square, but the man he replaced is refusing to leave, so he's been sworn in at the embassy in Senegal. A ski resort entombed by an avalanche in Italy. As many as 30 are missing as rescue workers battle blizzards to reach the remains of a hotel. And an unlikely revolt in leafy Surrey, where the Conservative local authority is blaming the Conservative government for cutting its budget and forcing it to raise council tax by 15%. Residents are to get their say in a referendum, but Surrey Council's leader tells us his appeal for extra money from ministers fell on deaf ears.
And they offer me sympathy, but the truth of the matter is sympathy does not pay a single council tax bill or a bill that I need for social care.
Welcome to Washington. You join us here on the eve of one of the biggest political upheavals in a generation. By this time tomorrow, Donald Trump will be the 45th president of the United States, poised to begin rolling back the legacy of the Obama years from day one. A whole swathe of policy, from foreign relations to massive spending cuts, revealed today from climate change to civil rights. This city, this White House, may never look the same again. Our Washington correspondent, Kylie Morris, has this report.
Donald Trump's journey from citizen to president began with a touchdown in a military plane. It was family first, in keeping with policy. Then finally, he and his wife descended to find a steady footing in the town he likes to call a swamp. Of course, he already has a luxury hotel here. Where else would he hold his leadership lunch with his vice president and other senior members of his team? He spoke briefly, calling out and thanking his supporters like a Vegas showman, paying tribute to his stellar people.
We have by far the highest IQ of any cabinet ever assembled.
When asked at a briefing earlier about the optics of the next president mixing business and politics when he's been so heavily criticised over conflicts of interest, well,
I think the idea that he's going to his own hotel shouldn't be a shocker. It's a beautiful place. It's somewhere that he's very proud of, and I think it's symbolic of the kind of government that he's going to run.
The cabinet he'd like to lead the government is a work still in progress.
If I'm confirmed, I will...
With Senate hearings today for, among others, former Goldman Sachs partner Steve Mnuchin, who's his pick for Treasury Secretary. Team Trump blames an obstructive opposition for the delay, but the Democrats say the problem is the candidates themselves.
Every day, there's another report of a major ethical lapse among the nominees for the cabinet, the swamp cabinet. The president-elect isn't draining the swamp with his cabinet picks. He's filling it up.
The nation's capital is now the newest listing in Donald Trump's real estate portfolio, and those who celebrate its transformation are gathering, including the son-in-law of former President Richard Nixon.
Some people have that X factor of being a leader. Ronald Reagan had it, Richard Nixon had it. Donald Trump has it, and he's going to demonstrate that in his inaugural speech.
I think he's built to be the best president this country's ever seen.
Billionaire pillow mogul Mike Lindell is buoyant.
I got to know where his, where his heart is to help the country, and I think he's just gonna play that role like you've never seen. People really need to give it every chance because he's gonna be amazing.
Bikers for Trump are already claiming the streets. Their aim, they say, to build a wall of meat between those celebrating the new president and those who don't share their opinion. The protesters are preparing too. Overnight, some turned out in costume portraying Trump as a kind of Hitler Klansman cross.
We are here, we are queer, we will dance!
In the well-heeled northern suburbs of the city, LGBT demonstrators staked out the new home of Vice President-elect Mike Pence, who once advocated using public funds for conversion therapy and tried to ban same-sex marriage in Indiana.
We wanted to make sure that everyone understands we're not only protesting Donald Trump, we also stand against Mike Pence and his agenda.
In the stately Kalorama neighbourhood this morning, workmen positioned security cameras at the new home of Jared Kushner and his wife Ivanka Trump. They'll share a corner with some other new residents, even better known in Washington. It's not the White House, but it's not too shabby. Movers lifted beds and a mattress into the new Obama household. The former first family close by, but it's hard to imagine greater political distance than this transfer of power.
And I'm going to point to the Capitol. Well, Kylie Morris joins us now in the lee of the Capitol, where all these events will take place tomorrow. Kylie, how quickly will we actually see anything in terms of decisions?
Very quickly, we're told. I've just been to a briefing by the Trump transition team. The next Vice President, Mike Pence, was there. He says they are now ready to go. Now, there is some distance between that and what the Democrats are doing in that building, which is delaying the nomination, or at least the confirmation of the members of cabinet that Donald Trump wanted desperately to have in place. They're not in place. But his team is saying he will nevertheless sign off on executive orders, potentially on some of his key issues. Immigration, Obamacare, they could be signed away, by Donald Trump within 24 hours of him actually assuming office. Certainly,
even though his key agents haven't yet been sworn in.
Well, I think many of his supporters, they want to see, he's sold himself as a man of action. They want to see that action, and he's very keen to deliver it.
Well, what about mood? Because, I've been to about 8 of these things, and I just don't detect quite the same exuberance in the streets.
I think you need to remember that this is not a Donald Trump town. Despite his hotel, I think 4% of Washington voted for Donald Trump in this last election. A lot of Donald Trump supporters are out where Matt is. They're out in the countryside. And I remember meeting those people 18 months ago, and the thrill that they had simply that Trump was going to even contest the election, the fact that he's won. They were desperate for change. They wanted exactly these kinds of things to happen. And we will definitely feel that thrill tomorrow. Remember Barack Obama's last election, when that moment happened, there were millions of people came. We're not going to see that, but we'll see something potentially comparative to George Bush.
Kylie Morris, we'll be talking to her again at some point. Well, if you want to understand the people who voted Donald Trump into the White House, you really need to go to places like West Virginia, the state with the highest support for Trump in the country, home to blue-collar, coal mining communities who felt abandoned, betrayed, and let down by those in power. Matt Fry has been to the Trump heartland of Logan County and joins us now from Charleston, West Virginia. Matt.
Well, John, you hit the nail on the head. Logan County that you just mentioned voted for Trump by 86%. Now, these are the kind of numbers you expect, frankly, not to find in a democracy. Why did they do that? Because they believe that Trump is their guy. He's going to be their savior. He's going to basically right all the wrongs that the Obama administration foisted, especially on the coal industry, which is the big money earner here. But what's really interesting, John, is listening to Kylie earlier on, listening to what you had to say, we seem to be in parallel universes here. Whatever Trump says to upset people in places like Washington and New York just emboldens his support in places like Charleston, West Virginia, whether it's misogyny or racism or indeed trying to scrap all the environmental regulations. The more he goes against the so-called liberal elite and the metropolitan elite, the more they love that stuff in this part of the country. For now. On the banks of the Kanawha River, the state capital of West Virginia, is a splash of optimistic gold. But this is the 49th poorest state out of 50. A place so far removed from Trump's natural habitat in Manhattan, it might as well belong to a distant galaxy. So when the candidate turned up here last summer, his words struck a chord.
First, we'll start winning, 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 and you are going to be very proud. And for those miners, get ready because you're going to be working your asses off, all right? Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
And he talks to you. He come here to Charleston, talk to us. Nobody else has ever done it.
So that was a big deal, him coming here.
Yeah. Yes, it was.
I think JFK was the last one that had the most hope. He's the last one to come to coal country. I know that for a fact.
Ryan, Jason and Dustin have just emerged after a 10-hour shift under the coal-rich crust of Logan County. They're all third-generation miners, 2 Democrats, 1 Republican. But like 86% of the county, they too voted for Trump because he promised to make coal great again.
If they shut this mines down, it just ain't affecting me. But the money I spend, the money my kids spend, my wife spends, those stores are going to shut down. One coal miner probably affects 5 other jobs. You know what I mean?
Those Americans who think that Trump is the worst thing that's ever happened to this country, what's your message to them?
Give him a chance. He's going to show us.
Yeah. We dealt 8 years with who they thought was going to do it, and they ruined this. The other 50% hate the ones that they want, so give our guy a chance. We gave their guy a chance.
From automation to globalization, the coal industry has shed 80% of its jobs in 3 decades. The final straw was the cost imposed by Obama's tough new environmental regulation. Scrapping that is Trump's biggest promise here. Rick Abraham, a grandson of Syrian immigrants, employs 50 people at this mine and has a message for those who care more for the environment than for jobs.
They would be sitting in the dark if we didn't do what we did here in West Virginia. So you can like coal or you can sit in the dark.
But when was the last time that a new president got into the White House and you felt this hopeful? Was it Reagan?
Never. Never, ever have I felt as excited for an incoming president as I have Donald Trump.
Seriously?
Donald Trump.
This is the lifeblood of West Virginia. This is their black gold. And although the industry has been losing thousands of jobs in the last few decades, they are so excited about a Trump presidency and everything that means for this industry that in this mine alone, they've started hiring new people since the election. 75 new people just in the last few months. Everywhere you look in Logan, you come across fossils of a proud industrial past. But what hasn't died here is the pride. Kenny Jeffrey worked the mines for 40 years before retiring and becoming a part-time fireman.
Hello, baby.
He has little time for the other America.
They don't understand. You know, I've been to New York City and I've seen it. It stinks. It's got an awful smell. Garbage everywhere, you know. And if that's what they want to live in, that's fine and dandy. We've got our own little place down here and we weekly keep our kids clean, take baths every night, and believe it or not, we wear shoes.
Pride alone cannot rescue this, the forgotten land of America, crushed by layers of sadness. Much of West Virginia looks like a landscape of dereliction and neglect, with some truly grim statistics to match. This is the 2nd poorest state in the Union, and when it comes to diabetes, heart disease, and deaths from illegal drugs, well, this is at the very top of the list. It is a state desperate for salvation. And the vast majority of people here think that Trump is their savior. What if he failed?
We'll be heartbroken if he doesn't deliver because Election Day was such a major moment for West Virginia. I was more afraid for my state than I think I've ever been because I knew that his election gave this area hope.
Hope and change, ring a bell? Unwittingly, Obama's rallying cry from 8 years ago has become Trump's today, but for this America. No pressure, Mr. President. Well, as we've seen, some of the mining jobs are already coming back, and there'll be more as the environmental regulations are stripped away, and indeed if manufacturing does, as Mr. Trump has promised, pick up. But set against that is the fact that a lot of the social programs that he wants to cut also benefit the people of West Virginia, whether it's the bottom end of Obamacare, whether it's drug rehabilitation programs, all these sort of things will also hurt this state. And at the end of the day, the people of West Virginia, like everyone else in this country, after 4 years of Trump, will have to make a judgment. Did he live up to expectations or didn't he? But I would add one last thing. This president has a zero-sum mentality when it comes to economics and to politics. And zero-sum will not unite the disunited states of America. John.
Well, joining us now from Monterey, California, is Leon Panetta, who served as Obama's defense secretary and head of the CIA. Leon Panetta, senior Republicans here are calling Mr. Trump the greatest change maker in American history. Does that worry you?
Well, I think what worries me is that an awful lot of promises about change have been made. We've heard promises for change before in this country, but to actually produce change, to really make a difference, demands that you have the ability to govern, to be able to work with both Republicans and Democrats, to be able to work within our system of checks and balances. And that's a much bigger challenge for any president to be able to overcome.
Well, the arena in which you worked, that of defense and indeed intelligence at different times, was one in which, to some extent, the breakthrough that Reagan and Gorbachev had developed in American-Russian relations, East-West, was never really followed through. Isn't it time, perhaps, to reach out to Russia and try another go?
Well, look, there's no question that we ought to make efforts to be able to deal with Putin. But in dealing with Putin, you have to deal with him from strength. You can't deal with Putin from weakness. And that means that you have to show him that there are lines that we will not allow Russia to cross. Russia has been very aggressive. Russia has been in a new stage of the Cold War. Russia has gone into Syria and done atrocious things in terms of Aleppo. Russia has hacked and tried to influence our election. Those are things, frankly, that we cannot accept, and we have to make that very clear to the Russians. If they understand that there are lines that we will not let them cross, then of course we can talk to Putin and try to see what we can achieve together. But it has to be done from strength.
Well, some would say that Aleppo and the situation in Syria illustrates, in fact, a weakness in American policy, and that, in fact, there will have to be change in the whole sort of projecting of American power, which appears to have somewhat retreated.
Well, look, the test of a new president is going to be in two areas. Number one, can he break the gridlock in Washington? Can he govern? Can he deal with both Republicans and Democrats to try to deal with major issues facing this country? That's test number one. Number two is whether or not a new president can truly be a world leader in dealing with the many challenges that we face in the world, whether it's ISIS, whether it's terrorism, whether it's Iran, North Korea, Russia, China, cyber attacks. All of that will demand United States leadership.
Well, Mr. Panetta, let me just test you on one thing, and that is, you know, people are talking about checks and balances, and sure, these are going to be tested in coming months. What about Twitter? Should the President of the United States really still be unleashing tweets in the White House?
Well, I'm a former chief of staff to President Clinton. I can't imagine working in the White House with a president who tweets in the morning. I don't understand that. It's going to be very difficult to deal with that because, frankly, once a president enters the Oval Office, I think that president has to be very careful about what is said on the issues that confront the president. That means that he ought to take the time to talk to his advisors, talk to his cabinet, decide very carefully what should or should not be said. If a president is reacting by emotion and tweeting his emotions to the world, that creates a tremendous amount of chaos and confusion, not only within the White House, but across the country and across the world. So I hope that he's able to put that aside and do what other presidents have done in terms of responsibly leading this country.
Leo Panetta, thank you very much indeed for joining us from Monterey in California. We'll be back later in the programme to discuss the changes to come. For now, back to Kathy in London.
Thanks, John. Now, up to 30 people are missing, feared dead after an avalanche slammed into a spa hotel in the mountains of central Italy, engulfing the entire building in snow. Rescuers had to ski to the hotel in blizzard conditions, and teams are still searching for any survivors beneath huge piles of snow and debris. The authorities have already been criticised for failing to respond quickly enough, as Kamian Zeram reports.
They were already too late. The middle of the night, and the only way in, by ski. The roads impassable, even with a 4x4. In places, rescuers navigated drifts 5 meters deep. And just before dawn, when they finally arrived, a cracked awning, and somewhere underneath, a remote but 4-star mountain hotel. The first on the scene dug through snow way above head height to find corridors blocked by the equivalent of liquid concrete. Set solid as it burst through all the way to the pool. More than 30 people trapped, feared dead, suffocated, frozen in the rooms above. In the summer, the Rigopiano is a luxury spa, 4 stories tall. Now it's an icy tomb. From the rescue helicopter, the A-frame roof is just about still visible beneath the snow. Only 2 people are known to have survived. 3 confirmed dead, the rest still missing. And so the questions. The first alarm was at 5:30 yesterday afternoon, when a man in the car park managed to ring his friend.
He called me and said, "Help, help, help. Call everybody, because the situation here is terrible. The hotel doesn't exist anymore."
But rescue teams didn't set out till 8 in the evening. Why the delay? The entire region, where the Apennines cut through Italy's central Abruzzo region, is already under pressure after an unusually heavy winter storm, as the Prime Minister visited Rescue HQ and praised the teams on the ground.
We saw the videos of rescuers reaching the hotel. These videos bear testimony to the sense of duty of the rescuers, but also to the very hard conditions they were operating in.
Because it's not just the snow. As emergency workers struggled through the drifts, consider the likely cause of yesterday's avalanche. Abruzzo is an earthquake zone. There were 4 big tremors here yesterday, and authorities are warning of more.
At least 20 firefighters are feared dead after a high-rise building in Tehran caught fire and collapsed. People had already been evacuated from the 17-story building, and firefighters were trying to control the blaze when it came crashing down. At least 75 people were injured in the collapse. The fire department said it had repeatedly warned occupants to leave the 50-year-old building. Now, while Donald Trump's inauguration has been meticulously planned with the streets all decked in flags, it couldn't be more different for Gambia's new president. Former Argos security guard Adama Barrow was sworn in today at a hastily arranged ceremony in the country's embassy in Senegal after the incumbent Yahya Jammeh refused to step down. In the last hour, Senegal said its troops had already entered Gambia, ready to oust Jammeh from power. Warwick O'Brien reports.
A nation holds its breath in the run-up to a defining inauguration. The swearing in of a political outsider a reformer on a promise to make a country great. This afternoon, the elected president of the Gambia, Adama Barrow, took the oath.
I, Adama Barrow, do swear.
The ceremony, though, took place at the Gambian embassy in neighbouring Senegal. As it was happening 300 kilometres south, we asked a local man from Banjul, the Gambian capital, to film in the streets around where he lived.
The streets of Banjul are virtually empty. They are empty. It's a ghost town. It's virtually empty. Everybody is at home. Some of them has left town since yesterday and days before, and even today.
Instead of street celebrations, a city bracing itself for possible conflict. The man beaten in elections last year, Yahya Jammeh, is digging his heels in, holed up in the presidential palace. In power for 22 years, once said he'd rule Gambia for 1 billion years, Allah permitting. Allah not the only one, it would seem, whose patience has run out. In a show of regional unity, troops from the economic community of West African states on the move into Gambia. The aim to pressurise Jammeh to relinquish power. These pictures taken today reportedly show ECOWAS forces in Senegal heading for the Gambian border. Ultimate destination, the capital. Jammeh and his state guards are now almost literally an island. It's thought that the generals of the ranks manning the barricades round the presidential palace will ultimately make the call to stand down or not.
The anticipation is that if ECOWAS does come in, they'll come in relatively overwhelming numbers compared to the Gambian army. There's also a question of how many of Jammeh's soldiers will remain loyal to him when ECOWAS. So the anticipation, of course, is that this is quite a localized conflict.
This is a decisive moment for the region, an early intervention by a coalition of West African countries dealing with a West African problem. The inauguration, a decisive moment for Gambians themselves. The reaction of one to the prospect of the end of Jammeh's rule today.
Everybody is happy. Everybody is happy now that that monster is gone. Yeah, that he's gone now. He's an ordinary citizen like us. He was feared, but not now.
We'll find out over the coming days whether this is wishful thinking or not.
Porrick O'Brien reporting there. Sinn Féin's Martin McGuinness says he'll be retiring from frontline politics because of ill health. Mr McGuinness served as Northern Ireland's Deputy First Minister from 2007 as part of a power-sharing deal with unionists. But he resigned last week in protest over a botched renewable energy scandal. That forced a snap election scheduled for early March.
I have to be very honest with myself that this has taken a serious toll on me in the course of recent times. And the honest answer is that I'm not physically able to fight an intensive election campaign over the course of the next 5 or 6 weeks. So I will not be a candidate in the forthcoming elections.
Now, Surrey isn't usually a hotbed of political insurrection, but the county council there, controlled by the Conservatives, is blaming the Tory government for putting it in a position where it has no choice but to raise council tax by 15%. Councillors say they need to fill a huge gap in their budgets to fund social care, but they'll now have to hold a county-wide referendum to put the decision to residents. Our political correspondent Michael Crick is in Godalming. Michael, this is quite a ding-dong, isn't it?
Indeed, Cathy. Of course, Surrey is always regarded as the typical Tory county. There are 11 MPs in Surrey. All 11 are Conservative. And now those MPs and ministers are being put on the spot by their Tory colleagues in the council chamber. I've contacted all 11 of the MPs today to try and find out how they're going to vote in this referendum. Several of them didn't bother to reply. Only one of them, Crispin Blunt, actually said he was willing to vote in favour of this council tax rise. Several of them privately said that they would vote against it. They said tactically they thought it was wrong and they thought it would be lost. But the crucial point is this, that those MPs include some really big names. Philip Hammond, the Chancellor, Chris Grayling, the Transport Secretary, above all, Jeremy Hunt, the Health Secretary. Will Jeremy Hunt and Phil Hammond and so on be willing to vote for their constituents to pay more in council tax, or are they going to vote against extra money going to some of their poorest constituents? This town, Godalming, is part of Jeremy Hunt's constituency of southwest Surrey. Voters will be told by Surrey Council that the 15% tax rise is needed to pay not just for extra social care, but other spending such as children's services and people with learning disabilities. But the possible referendum outcome is far from clear. So would you pay an extra 15%?
Not if I don't have to.
Well, so you'll vote no in the referendum?
I'll vote no in the referendum then.
Right, so what are they going to do about all those things?
Find it from the extortionate amount of council tax we already pay?
I totally agree with it, but I just want to know more about it, as in how they've come to the 15% figure, and then maybe look into it. But yeah, I'm not saying no straight away.
I'm totally in favour of that. I think that our social services are in a dire state at the moment. I think the most vulnerable people should be looked after, and I think in Surrey we can well afford that extra money, and it might be us one day.
Do you pay council tax?
Do birds fly?
Would you be willing to pay?
Yes, I do.
And would you pay an extra 15%?
Not on my pension, which is very minimal.
Labour accused the government of avoiding its responsibilities.
It's not right that we should thrust the social care crisis on local authorities, all of whom have different levels of income all over the country. It's a central government responsibility, and the central government should face up to its responsibility.
The law requiring referendums for significant council tax rises was brought in by Eric Pickles 6 years ago, but the only one held so far, the Bedfordshire police budget, was lost decisively.
Well, a short time ago, I spoke to the leader of Surrey County Council, David Hodge, and I began by asking him whether it was a political stunt designed to make a point to central government.
It is absolutely vital that we protect the vital service for the Surrey residents. Government has cut our grant by £170 million since 2010. The demand for our adult social care, our learning disability clients, and to protect our children's services is growing year on year.
But this is your party in power. They haven't woken up to that fact, have they?
But I'm not in power. My responsibility is to the people of Surrey to make sure that the vital services they want are run for them.
Well, this is extraordinary. You're kind of disowning the central government, which, you share the party, but you don't share their message on cuts.
The message for me is about how do I, as the leader of the County Council, look after the residents of Surrey. We have made £450 million worth of savings since 2010. We're on track to save £700 million by 2020. That is a substantial, significant sum of savings that is really important. But in order to do that, in order that we can continue with that, we also have to recognise that with the government cutting our grant by £170 million, they've also taken funding for learning disabilities.
This is unheard of, though, having a Conservative politician argue for 15% tax rise.
But do you not honestly think it's right that somebody, for once and for all, stands up and tells the truth, what's going on? Everyone talks about adult social care being short of money, but nobody's prepared to stand up and say it has to stop.
And when you deliver this message to Whitehall, to ministers in Whitehall, as I know you have been meeting with them, what do they say to you?
They say there's no money.
What do you say to that?
Sympathy, and they offer me sympathy. But the truth of the matter is, sympathy does not pay a single council tax bill or a bill that I need for social care.
Do you believe there's no money?
I think the government always finds money for projects when it wants to. I would ask the question, and I've been quite open about this, Cathy, I'm very serious now here. We have to ask ourselves, is the money that we're spending on overseas aid, is that the best use of my money and your money? Because none of this is government money. This is the residents' money of this country. I'm a great believer in overseas aid. I've been involved in projects with Rotary International. But what I will say is I want to know what outcomes we're getting for that money. Some of that money could be spent to looking after the children and the families who are coming from Syria, which we should look after. But my concern is, what about adult social care? We are being placed in a position where I really regret this. I'm really quite upset that we've had to be put in this position, that I have no alternative. The alternative I have is to take a harsh brush and sweep away services. I'm not prepared to do that. And the reason I'm not prepared to do it is I became a councillor to make a difference for Surrey residents.
And what if you don't get it through the referendum? Where are you going to get the money from?
If we don't get it through the referendum, we'll have no option but to start to look at what service we can stop doing. And that would be a mistake.
Have you thought about quitting? Has it crossed your mind that this isn't what you came into politics to do?
I came into politics to make a difference, to do my best for the people of Surrey. I will not quit. I'm not a quitter.
David Hodge speaking to me earlier. Now, for the second time in a week, the Prime Minister has thrown down the gauntlet, this time to business executives attending the World Economic Forum in Davos. She told them that failing to tackle inequality would fuel extremism on both left and right. And she called on businesses to pay their fair share of tax and address concerns about executive pay. But she had a slightly more conciliatory message to Europe after her ambitious Brexit speech earlier in the week. Our business editor, Siobhan Kennedy, is with me. So tell us first, Siobhan, what was the Prime Minister's message to Davos man and the odd woman, of course?
Well, you're right, Cathy. 80% of the delegates at Davos were men. That aside, the Prime Minister had a pretty difficult balancing act today because, on the one hand, she went to Davos to reassure the International Business Committee that post her Brexit speech, post her decision to pull out of the single market, that Britain was still very much open for business, pro-trade, pro-markets, pro-globalisation, and that she was confident of making a deal in Europe, a good trade deal. But at the same time, she had a message, a tough message for her audience, many of whom will recall her criticism of what she called the rootless international elite. Now, she called on them today to change their behaviour too, to make sure more of the spoils of globalisation, if you like, went to the many and not to the few. Here's what she had to say.
We must heed the underlying feeling that there are some companies, particularly those with a global reach, who are playing by a different set of rules to ordinary working people. So it is essential for business to demonstrate leadership, to show that in this globalised world, everyone is playing by the same rules, and that the benefits of economic success are there for all our citizens.
Well, how did that message go down in Davos?
Well, there was no overt criticism, Cathy, of it, and everyone seemed pretty supportive. But actions speak louder than words. Take a look at this. In the past 48 hours since the Prime Minister has given both these key speeches, some of the world's biggest investment banks, you can see here, HSBC, UBS, JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs, all of whom have major offices here in London, have all said or indicated that they will move thousands of jobs from London to Europe precisely because of her message that we are pulling out of the single market. You can toss up the numbers there. That comes to about 7,000 jobs. Now, the Prime Minister met with some of those executives today in Davos. She said it was a very positive meeting, but she will also know that 7,000 highly paid investment bankers walking out of the door into Europe will have a significant impact on the British economy through a loss of revenue for the Exchequer. You also have to think the Prime Minister will be asking herself, where these leading investment banks lead, will others follow?
Siobhan, thank you very much. Now, temperatures are plunging to minus 16. There's been snow and freezing wind. And for thousands of migrants stuck in Serbia, desperate to reach the European Union, there is a choice. Centres run by the government or sleeping rough in terrible conditions. Our chief correspondent, Alex Thompson, has been to one of those centres just outside the Serbian capital, Belgrade.
They gaze out from the relative warmth of the trams on a city hunkered down in recent weeks. Migrants and refugees stuck in Belgrade in what local people say is a particularly harsh winter.
A few days ago, though, nighttime temperatures were getting down to minus 10, and in 2 or 3 days' time, they're going to be back down there again. That is dangerous to be sleeping out in. And this place, a car park, is where people are sleeping.
And yes, you wake up here inches from the driving snow. And yes, it's a place for cars, not human beings. Serbia says there are plenty of safe, warm camps, but here you can meet your smuggler and try every day if you want for what matters, Hungary and the EU. Mohammed's from Pakistan.
A lot of people just trying 10, 11 times, but they not get succeed. So it's very tough, and also Hungarian police beating us too much.
Close by, a drop-in centre, a place at least to meet up, to get warm, to get in touch, or just get away from it all. Among those here, children without their parents. One just 9 years old. He's been on the road for 6 months. He spoke through a translator.
Afghanistan is not safe. It's a very dangerous country. My dad said, I don't have money for you, it's better to go. You go there, if I have money, I will come.
And this place has been his home, the terrible conditions near Belgrade railway station, where more than 1,000 migrants and refugees somehow exist.
It's very hard to live there. Lots of people got sick because they were living there. I got sick too. It's very dirty, the floor, everything. Also the air is dirty because of the smoke.
Thousands of miles from home and from his parents, he's now trying to reach Germany with his uncle. Save the Children provides some support, but the door to the EU is all but shut.
The only legal way to leave Serbia at the moment is through asking for asylum in Hungary. But Hungary admits only 10 people per day, and it's only on working days, and they are prioritizing families.
Serbia, meanwhile, insists no one should sleep rough, and here's why. One of several camps, this just 10 miles from Belgrade. Conditions here warm, secure, 3 meals a day. There are medical facilities, a games room, even a computing room. It's handout time for fresh fruit, an enthusiastic response. But those who sleep rough in Belgrade won't come to camps like this. They think it's a trap. They'll get deported.
Migrants' fears that they are going to be deported if accommodated here are completely groundless. We did everything we could to persuade them to come here, telling them nothing won't happen to you, but a warm room, 3 warm meals and proper health care.
And so it is that the frozen Danube is now a chasm. On one side they risk freezing to death sleeping rough on the streets of Belgrade. Across the pack ice a camp awaits, but fear and suspicion still keeps so many away.
Well, a quick update on these appalling conditions that we've seen in this town on the last couple of nights. The aid group MSF have put in some heated tents, so some improvement for around 100 or so, but this debate will continue here. The Serbs insistent we do not deport people, and there's plenty of room. In fact, they said they could accommodate anyone sleeping rough here in 4 hours. That's what they told us today. The international aid organisations like Save the Children telling us they are sceptical that there is in fact room in these camps, and they also lend a degree of credibility, it should be said, to reports that there are and have been some deportations from the Serbian camps. But I have to say the conditions that we saw and we were given free and open access were quite impressive. Back to you, John, in Washington.
Thank you, Alex. And we'll be here in Washington after the break as Mr. Trump comes to Washington. The city prepares for supporters and protesters to descend in their hundreds of thousands. Love him or loathe him, we'll be debating the seismic changes to come. Welcome back to Washington, where the area around the Capitol is surrounded by barriers and thousands of police and security officials, preparing now for up to 1 million people expected to descend for tomorrow's inauguration, supporters and protesters alike. The political change to come, we're hearing, will be swift and drastic. Hints of massive spending cuts and a series of executive orders within hours of Trump's swearing in. And one particular change Donald Trump's team has made for tomorrow's ceremony has upset the 89-year-old Charlie Brotman. He was the legendary announcer for every inauguration here in Washington since Eisenhower in 1957. He was sworn in then for a second term until Donald Trump's team fired Mr. Brotman by email. 60 years of doing the job. When I went to meet him, and he told me he won't be going quietly. He's been invited to be the announcer for the Million Women's Anti-Trump Protest March here on Saturday.
My goodness, how did this happen? And then I tried to explain, this is a women's movement. Why would you want a man there? We wanted you because at this time, you're very popular. And everyone encouraged me, go ahead and do it. It'd be fun. Okay.
Charlie, the numbers will probably be even bigger than for the parade.
It's absolutely correct. They're talking about lots of people.
Well, joining us now is Breen Butler. She is the organizer of Saturday's Million Women's March on Washington, which could attract more people than tomorrow's inauguration ceremony itself, and by Sandra King, who is chairwoman of New York's Yates County Republican Party. Breen Butler, what's this march all about?
So this march is, we have people from all over the country and the world, to be honest, coming together on Washington. And this is a march on Washington. You know, it's not a march against Donald Trump. And we're coming together just to send a strong message to the upcoming administration that we're here, we're watching you, and we want our voices to be heard, the voices that have been silenced throughout the years, even before this election. You know, many years we've dealt with a lot of different, segregation and division in this country, and we're trying to bring that together.
Is it about women's voices or humanity's voices?
Humanity's voices, but women are leading the march. So women are actually stepping up and being the voice to all of these marginalized communities.
Now you're here really for the inauguration. Will you be marching too?
No, we had our Women for Trump rally in Albany, and just as she was saying, we're here. You know, we want this country to come together. This is a wonderful opportunity. Everybody should be here celebrating America and the peaceful transition of power. And it is. It's change is coming to this country, and it's good change because so many people's voices have been silenced for 8 long years, and times are changing.
Breen, it would be an exaggeration to suggest you're on the same side, beyond your gender.
I mean, I think that what you were saying, voices have been silenced, voices need to be heard. I agree with that. And, you know, this isn't, for us, this isn't about being a Republican or a Democrat. This is about believing in humanity and believing that...
You're saying this would happen even without Donald Trump in the White House. You would have done it anyway.
I mean, I think that Donald Trump is sort of what...
the catalyst.
He made us, you know, he was sort of like the women of the world were sitting up on a powder keg and Donald Trump lit the match.
He did say some rather naughty things about women, didn't he?
And no different than so many men have said about women across the country for years. I worked in a male-predominant field, and I'm sure, you know, women that work here and men talk like they talk. But that's
we'd
all
like to get
old.
men talking better, wouldn't we?
Well, yeah, and I've been around Mr. Trump, and he's been the utmost professional. And
Do you think that's acceptable, though?
I think he's been the utmost professional.
Because I'm in a male-dominated industry as well. I mean, being a chef, and you know, hearing those words that Donald Trump was saying to other women, it struck a chord in a lot of people, and that's why people are furious, because it's unacceptable, you know, to say those things about a woman. It's unacceptable to talk down to somebody or to be a bully, and especially as somebody that's the leader of the free world.
And I agree, but by the same token, there's so much more that this election is about. It's about lowering taxes. It's about giving the people the right to be heard, once again, like you said. It's about bringing America back together. This has been such a divisive country. And, you know, if you're a chef and you want someday to own your own small business, and we
I do own a business, yeah.
Then you know how hard it is to run business, that the government is out, the taxes are high, the regulations are so high, it's so hard to do business. My daughter's a farmer, and the regulations that are falling in on the farming industry and so many other things. Things have got to change, and that's what we want. We want the government to get out of our lives, and Donald Trump represents
Well, I
that.
mean, I think that one thing we should talk about, let's talk about health care. I mean, you want to talk about, you know, as a small business owner, I mean, I worried, you know, I depend on the Affordable Care Act as well as so many other people around the country. You know, I mean, when you're looking at people that are making minimum wage and their whole paychecks going towards, you know, covering their medical expenses, you know, it's something's got to change.
Absolutely, and that's Obamacare. You know, my broker, you know, they have to have Obamacare, and the deductible is so high that they never use it, and their premiums, you know, their deductible is so high because
you two were brought on to disagree, but you're looking seriously as if you agree.
Well, I mean, I agree that yes, there are certain things in the healthcare that need to change.
Absolutely
but
need to change.
A huge concern. I mean, not only were decisions made in the middle of the night, you know, just trying to get rid of the ACA, but also, you know,
But
the
how
whole
is the ACA?
pre-existing conditions.
But
you
don't
know?
get too technical, because we've got an international community watching this.
Well, yeah, but how is the? I mean, Obamacare was pushed.
Are you
through
aware
on
that in
us.
little towns around Europe there are people coming together to mimic what you're
Well,
doing?
actually, so let's talk about that. So I'm the global coordinator. There's over 600 marches happening around the world, which is absolutely incredible. You know, London's having a march, Indonesia's having a march, Japan's having a march. You name it, a march is probably happening there.
And we'll be filming it. Thank you
Yeah.
very much indeed, both of you, Green and indeed Sandra, for coming in.
Thank you so much.
So, the 8 years of Obama's era end this evening. The first African-American president who arrived with hope and promises of huge change has presided over a fractured country and a deeply divided political system which he couldn't heal. He and his family spend their last night in the White House tonight, and they leave tomorrow scandal-free and with a legacy of growing economy. But there have been considerable foreign policy failures and growing racial unrest. Tonight, we leave you with images of some of his highs and of his lows.
Come on, baby, don't you wanna go? And those who tell us that we can't, we will respond with that timeless creed that sums up the spirit of a people. Yes, we can. Come on, baby, don't you wanna go? Howdy, hey, baby, don't you wanna go?
I've come here to Cairo to seek a new beginning between the United States and Muslims around the world. Assalamu alaikum.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound.
Every time I think about those kids, it gets me mad. After a firefight, they killed Osama bin Laden. We can say to those families who have lost loved ones to Al-Qaeda's terror, justice has been done.
But with shells and helicopter gunships still pounding Syrian cities,
The use of chemical weapons is and would be totally unacceptable. If you make the tragic mistake of using these weapons, there will be consequences and you will be held accountable.
This bill is fundamentally flawed.
He's not a very popular person right now.
How do you make Obama's eyes light up? Shine a flashlight in his ears. That's pretty good. Obama out.